We have the St. Louis Brass Band coming up under the direction of David Drillinger. But before, I have an announcement to make, and I will be making announcements throughout when I introduce our speakers and our musical entertainment today. First, let me say, as you know, the Chautauqua is an opportunity for you to stay here over a number of days and enjoy the entertainment and education. And that if you would like to rent a tent, they can be rented on a daily basis for those wishing to camp on the grounds, depending on the size. You may rent a tent for as low as $4 a day. Those wishing to bring their own tents will be charged a ground rental fee of $1. Board floors will be installed for tents for an additional $1.50, and camp furniture may be rented for a fee. Please check with the hardware store. And additionally, straw and hay will be available for stuffing your mattresses. This is the kind of luxury that we provide you here at the Edwardsville Chautauqua. Huzzah, friends, huzzah. Now, without further ado, because you didn't come to hear me preach, though, coming up on Sunday, if you'd like to come by the parish, we would love to see you there. We now have the St. Louis Brass Band under the direction of David Drillinger to entertain you and edify you. Take it away, St. Louis Brass Band.
Thank you, one and all. We are members of the St. Louis Brass Band, and we're very pleased to be here today and add a little band music to the Living History Days. If you're not familiar with us, there's actually 20 more of us when we're all together and giving the full force of the St. Louis Brass Band. And we are directed by Dr. John Bell of St. Louis, of the Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. Our first selection, as every good band concert should start, is with a march, and that was Harold Walter's march entitled Escort of Honor. Moving along with a little bit of a change of pace now, we'd like to play a medley of 3 waltzes, which would be very popular of the time period of the Chautauqua. The Bowery Waltz, The Band Played On, and The Man with a Flying Trapeze were all written in the mid to late 1800s. So here is the Bowery Waltz Medley. The Posthorn Gallop was written in 1844 and was originally played on a curved brass instrument wrapped very tightly so the stagecoach drivers or other riders could easily carry them in a pouch. Later, the posthorn was straightened into a single straight pipe. Please now enjoy the Posthorn Gallop. Camptown Races was written by Stephen Foster and is a lively tune with fun lyrics that have enchanted singers and listeners alike since its very beginnings. Foster is often called America's first composer or the father of American music. Our arrangement not only gives you the melody, but also allows you to imagine the race, whether on horseback or on foot. Our final three selections all come from a medley of tunes entitled Echoes of the 1860s. America's great writers of Civil War songs produced a horde of songs, dances, marching tunes, and patriotic airs that have continued to live on till today. This music comprised the repertory of typical American regimental bands such as the 3rd New Hampshire, an active group throughout the war at Port Royal, South Carolina. All of these tunes we will now play were found in the band books of that organization. Originally, these pieces were written for the over-the-shoulder brass band instruments of the Civil War period and have been recorded using those period instruments. Of course, we would have to sit facing with our backs to you if we had those horns, so we decided to use our own contemporary instruments. We will begin this with General Lee's Grand March. Next up will be the Port Royal Gallop, and finally concluding our portion of today's program with the Storm Gallop. There'll be a slight break in between each tune, so feel free to applaud in between each tune if you like what you hear. We do hope that you have enjoyed what we've performed for you today, and if you'd like to know more about the St. Louis Brass Band, our website is stlbb.org. We'll be performing at the Ballpark Village in St. Louis 1 week from tomorrow at 12:15 p.m. And we would hope that you would come and join us sometime in the future to see what the St. Louis Brass Band is all about. Thank you very much. Here is the Echoes of the 1860s.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah.
the St. Louis Brass Band. Once again, friends, thank you very much. I'm D.D. Fry, the Reverend D.D. Fry. I've been told that you had some trouble hearing me at the very beginning of our Chautauqua today, and I'd like to apologize for that. It's been over 140 years since I've done one of these, and my voice is not what it used to be. So that my friend Steve has told me that if I speak into this talking stick, you'll be able to hear me better. Is everyone able to hear me? Yes! If you're able to hear me, could I hear a huzzah, please? Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm here with my whole family. My wife, May, is here, and so is the whole Women's Christian Temperance Union. Let's give them a round of applause. Their cause is noble, though we may not all necessarily agree. Also, I'm here with my daughter, Mary, and our good friend, Mason, who has agreed to wear my hat for me. Thank you both for coming up today. What is this strange box you have here, Mason? That's a phone? And what is a phone? I have an announcement from the committee. There will be special classes offered on There will be special classes offered on elocution, physical culture, and astronomy. Extra fees are required. If you're interested, you can see me, and I will help set you up with those special classes. And now we have a very special speaker for you. I'm honored to introduce Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, was born in Hannibal, Missouri in 1835. He has worked as a printer, typesetter, and newspaper writer. He also worked as a pilot on the Mississippi River before heading west and trying his hand at mining. He began publishing stories in 1861 in a newspaper in California, and his story, called, one of my favorites, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County, brought him fame in 1865. I'm sure we all remember that story. He has since published a number of stories and books, including The Innocents Abroad, Old Times on the Mississippi, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, The Prince and the Pauper, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Mr. Clemens has been speaking widely on the Chautauqua circuit, and we are privileged to have him with us tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Samuel Clemens.
I was once presented to an audience by a lawyer, and this lawyer kept his hands in his pockets like this, and he introduced me this way: Mark Twain, a humorist who is really funny. A very rare creature indeed, he went on to say. I was struck speechless by this complimentary thunderbolt. I had scarcely in my lifetime listened to a compliment so beautifully phrased or so well deserved. And yet we had among us a much rarer creature than a humorist who's really funny. Why, folks, we had us a lawyer kept his hands in his own pockets. But I do love compliments. We all do. Humorists, burglars, United States congressmen, all of us in the illegal trades. I love a good story well told, don't you folks? That's why I'm forced to tell them. And did you know that there's only 3 kinds of stories worth telling? There's the comic story, the witty story, and the humorous story. Other than that, just forget about it. Comic story and witty story are European. They're short, to the point, and they have a zinger at the end. But the humorous story is America. Grew up right here on this continent, and here it's remained. You see, the comic story is English. The witty story is French. I know because I've been to France. I went to Paris when I was a young man, and I offended a Frenchman. You won't hold that against me, will you? I don't know what I did, but he walked up and he said, "Monsieur, I challenge you to a duel." Well, I was a little worried about it. I'm no good with swords. But then they told me that if you get challenged, you get to choose the weapons. So I chose brickbats at 100 yards. I knew no Frenchman could hit me from that distance, but I'm from Hannibal, where we know how to chuck rocks. And I nailed him. Now, the comic story is English. Would you folks like an example of the comic story? You can take it home and impress your friends with it, because any idiot can tell it. From time to time, I'll if you're still awake. Well, this story is just awful. So if you have to rush out and fan yourselves, I'll understand. It seems there was a young soldier on the battlefield, and he had been ordered up to the front line with his entire regiment. And even before they left the camp, they could hear the sound of battle off in the distance. And they get up close, and the cannon is booming, and there's small arms fire, and they get up right on the front line. They form up for battle. And one of those strange events sometimes happened on the battlefield. A round cannonball about this size came bouncing, skipping across the battlefield, and it bounced and it hit our young soldier on his right leg and took his leg clean off. Well, he fell back into the grass, and he looked up at his comrades and he said, "They done blowed my leg off. Would somebody please take me back to the hospital, or I'm a goner?" Well, one of his friends was a good Samaritan, so he came over and he picked up his friend. He hefted him up onto his shoulder, and he got him up onto his shoulder, and as he turned to leave, another cannonball came along and took off the wounded soldier's head. Now he's carrying a headless corpse back toward the hospital, making pretty good progress. When along comes an officer on horseback, sees this strange sight of a man fleeing away from the fighting with a headless corpse over his shoulder, and he stops him and he says, "Where are you going, you booby?" And the man said, "I'm taking this man back to the hospital. He ain't gonna make it." Well, the officer was angry. He said, "You put him down. Put that man down right now. That's an order." So the soldier went over, put down his friend, and then he stepped back with surprise, and he looked at where the leg used to be, and he looked at where the head used to be, and he looked up at the officer, and then he examined again, and then he looked up at the officer and he said, "But sir, the man told me it was his leg." That's the comic story. Takes no skill to tell it. But the humorous story is American. Did you know it grew up right here? Does not exist in the rest of the world. And it takes an artist of high degree to tell the comic story. Now, if there's any inattention out here, if you allow your mind to wander when I'm telling this next story, you'll be lost. You'll need a mental map, and I won't be able to help you. Are you folks ready? Are you ready? All right. I was in the mining camp, and they told me, "Old Jim Blaine's about ready to get to tell his story." And I ran all the way across the camp, walked in, Jim's sitting on an empty powder keg smoking his pipe. Jim always liked to live dangerously. And he started in. And he said, well, I don't reckon them times will ever come again. There never was a bullier old ram than that ram grandfather got from a feller up in Siskiyou County. Fetched him home, turned him loose in the meadow, and next morning, he went down to have a look-see at his new purchase. Now, he didn't mean to do it, but he's fumbling around in his pocket like this, and he accidentally, he drops a 10-cent piece into the grass. And he commenced to fumbling around to get it. Now, his purchase was ram, and the ram was up on the slope taking notice, but my grandfather wasn't taking no notice because he is interested about the dime. And the ram, he bent down with his horns, kind of taking target practice. And my grandfather, he's a bending down, and the ram see him in this attitude, and he took it for an invitation. Smith stood just there. No, not just there. 15 foot away, perhaps. It was Smith of Tulare County. I remember perfectly plain. Smith of Tulare stood just there, and my grandfather, he's a bending down so, and the ram see him in this attitude, and here he come down the slope, 30 miles an hour, his eye full of business. No, sir. No, sir. It weren't Smith of Tulare County. It was Smith of Sacramento. I don't know how I come to get them Smiths mixed up like that. Well, Smith of Tulare was just a nobody, but Smith of Sacramento, where they come of the best Southern blood in these here United States. Well, one of them married a Whitaker. I reckon that gives you an idea of the high society they could float around in. Look at Maria Whitaker. Now, there's a girl for you. Little? Why, sure she was little, but had a heart just like a bullock. Just as good and lovely and generous as the day's long. Why, she couldn't have a thing and another person need it and not get it. Get it and welcome. She had a glass eye, and she used to lend it to Flora Ann Baxter to receive company with. Beautiful eye, set her off admirable. It was blue on the front side, the side you look out of, and a gilding on the back. Didn't match the other eye, which was one of them brown, yellowy, tranquil kind of eyes. You know how them kind of eyes are. But it worked pretty picturesque. One brown, one blue eye. Only trouble was, Flora Ann was kind of large, and that eye didn't fit. The eye was a number 7, and she had been excavated for a 14. But it worked pretty picturesque. Only trouble was, when she'd wink, that glass eye'd turn over. When she'd get real excited, it'd start flashing, first blue, then yellow, and blue, and yellow, flashing and whirling, and blue and yellow, while the oldest man in the world couldn't keep up the expression on the side of her face. Grown people didn't mind it, but it almost always made the children cry. Flora Ann married a Hagedorn. Reckon you've been hearing of the Hagedorns? Old Maryland Eastern Shore blood, the Hagedorns. Ain't no better blood south of the line. You remember Sally Hagedorn? Well, Sally married a missionary. They went over there across the Pacific Ocean to one of them islands, take the good news to the cannibals, and they ate them. Ate him too, which were irregular, weren't accustomed to eat the missionary, just the family, but in their case they made an exception. They went over to fetch the things, came in a big sailing boat, came up to the shore in a little boat, And the cannibals came right up to him. They had a committee, and they had a spokesman, and he stood there and he went, "We understand that you're missing a missionary and a family which we ate. It was an accident and it won't happen again." We had to accept it. It was an entirely sincere apology, but there ain't no such thing as an accident. Are you with me? Ain't no such thing as an accident. Look at my Uncle Lem and talk to me about accidents. One day, Uncle Lem, he's walking downtown with his dog Jasper, and he weren't no mongrel neither. Stop mumbling it. He was a composite. I hear him barking now. He was a composite. A composite is made up of all the best qualities of all the dog breeds, and a mongrel's just the riffraff that's left over. Wonderful dog, don't say nothing against him. And they're walking downtown, and there's an Irishman up on the 3rd floor on a scaffolding with a hod of brick, and as he come along, his foot slipped. Down he come, bricks and all, knocked to everlasting aspirations out of one of the pedestrians. He's dead and ready for the coroner in 2 seconds. And they said, "It's an accident." Well, ain't no such thing. But somebody says, "Well, if it weren't an accident, why did it happen?" Well, that's easy. It was to save the Irishman. He got up and walked away. It was to save the Irishman. You see, somebody says, "Yeah, but why weren't the dog appointed?" Well, that's easy too. You can't hit no dog with no Irishman. He'd see him coming and get out of the way. Can't depend on no dog to carry out no special providence. Well, folks, that's the humorous story. Did you know that's as American as apple pie? And if you did not find it amusing, perhaps you're European. Thank you very much.
Samuel Clemens, everyone. A round of applause for Samuel Clemens. I have another announcement here from the committee, if you'll allow me. Single admission for adults arriving after 6 p.m. is 20 cents. It's almost 4 o'clock, so if you have any friends or family coming after 6 o'clock, they will have to pay the 20 cents admission fee. Character builder, sir. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was born in New York, where she attended Emma Willard's Troy Female Seminary. She studied law with her father, New York Supreme Court Justice, and married her husband, Henry Brewster Stanton, in 1840. Ms. Stanton was an active abolitionist and a strong supporter of temperance, working with Lucretia Mott and Susan B. Anthony. In 1848, Ms. Stanton, along with others, met at a convention in Seneca Falls, New York, calling for equal rights for women. Some say that Seneca Falls was the beginning of the women's rights movement in the United States. During the Civil War, Mrs. Stanton was active in raising money for the Union cause. She also supported civil rights and suffrage and for the freedom of enslaved people. Since the war, Mrs. Stanton has been a leader in rights for women and for women's suffrage, and even drafted an amendment to the Constitution. She helped form and became president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. Friends, welcome Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Good afternoon. We truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. Oh my. Talking to the speaking machine. talking to the speaking machine. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal. I wrote those words in 1848. All right, Thomas Jefferson wrote the words. I just added to them. Well, if this gentleman hasn't been to a Chautauqua in over 100 years, neither have I. It is so nice to be brought back from the dead. Now, a couple things happen to you when you come back from the dead. The first thing is, ladies, you get 5 inches taller and 100 pounds lighter. Remarkable. But the second thing, it's very disturbing. It scares me, it worries me, and it saddens me. In your last election 3 years ago, only about half of registered women voters went to the polls and voted. Where were the other 40% of you? Where were you? This was your right, and no one took it. I think people might have forgotten the work and the struggles that we did 3-4 generations ago. So since you took all the time and trouble to bring me back from the dead, I think I'll tell you a little about myself. Born in 1815, indeed, in New York. My father, Daniel Cady, was an attorney. There were several children in the family. We had 1 brother and 6 sisters. When my brother died, my father was just desolate. Oh my goodness, his only son had died. I went up to him and he put me on his lap and he said, "Elizabeth, how I wish you would have been born a boy." And right there and then, I thought, I will try to do everything I can to make my father respect me and to make him feel like he has a son. So I learned mathematics, a very manly subject. Science, I taught myself Greek and Latin. I learned how to ride horses at breakneck speed. Yes. Well, one day I was close to his office and a woman was in asking for legal advice, and this woman was very, very upset. She said her husband had just died and that her son had taken everything. The son had taken everything, the house, the furniture, the land, and she was left destitute. She said, "Please, Mr. Cady, is there anything you can do for me?" And my father told her, no, that was the way the law was written. Well, I went and talked to my father and I said, that was just so unfair. And he said, "But Elizabeth, sometimes laws are bad." Well, the next day he caught me in his law office with a pair of scissors and his law books. I was going to cut out all the bad laws. Well, I found out that's not how you remedy the situation. I grew up rather willful, rather stubborn, yes, and I married Henry Brewster Stanton. Many people didn't think it would be a good match, but we married, and we honeymooned in London. And you might think, my goodness, isn't that nice? But it was a working honeymoon. You see, my husband was an abolitionist, and he went to London to attend the Anti-Slavery Convention. So I attended too. Well, I got as far as the front door. That's where they stopped the women. Free the slaves, but keep the women outside. Actually, we were allowed to attend. We had to stand and sit behind a curtain. So many of the men were upset by this that they too joined us. Was my husband one of them? Oh, no, sir. He's shaking his head. No, he was not. My husband earned a living by making speeches, anti-slavery speeches, but eventually we came back to the United States. He read law with my father. We moved to Boston, and eventually we moved to Seneca Falls, a backwater country town in the middle of nowhere. Well, the children were soon coming, one after another after another. I would shock the people in the town, in the neighborhood. Every time a new baby arrived, I hung up a flag outside the house. Red if it was a boy, white if it was a girl. I hung up 5 red flags and 2 white flags. The birth of my last child, Bob, I was 44 years old. He weighed over 12 pounds. Yes, madam. Yes. Well, it was in 1848 that I and some friends in Seneca Falls, we were discussing the problems that women were having, and I recalled that lady from my father's law office, and I realized what was going on, and I said, we need to remedy the situation. So we called a convention, the Seneca Falls Convention, 1848. My husband was conveniently out of town for that. We held it at a Methodist church. First day, only women. Second day, men and women. And we discussed the main issues of the day. Women being able to go to college, women in professions, women to own property, women to get custody of children, and the last one was women voting. I wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, and I mimicked the Declaration of Independence. Instead of the colonists needing these things and deserving them, it was the women who deserved them. It didn't get a lot of good press. As a matter of fact, it got nothing but bad press. But it got people discussing and thinking, and isn't that good? Isn't that what we wanted? It was a few years later that I met Susan Anthony, and she became my friend and my suffrage partner, I suppose you could say. Susan was a few years younger than me, but she insisted on calling me Mrs. Stanton, even though I was just a few years older. Susan was adored by my children, Aunt Susan. She would come to the house, we would talk and plan. It was said that I stirred up Susan, and Susan stirred up the world. I said, I forged the thunderbolts, Susan fired them. You see, I was stuck at home with children. Susan was unmarried. She was free. I wrote the speeches. Susan delivered them. We worked through the 1850s, not only on women's suffrage, but on abolition. And then the Great Civil War happens. We put aside our women's suffrage work. We're going to work and put all of our efforts towards the Union effort, right? Free the slaves, keep the Union together. And many of us thought that the government would be so thrilled and so grateful that we did all of this work that they, of course, would give us the right to. And did they? No. They said, ladies, you're going to have to wait. We're going to have to wait. Wait? Oh, even the great man Frederick Douglass, who we worked with tooth and nail to get rid of slavery, was on the same page as the government. Ladies, you're going to have to wait. There were basically three groups of women. There was a group of women who thought we can change the law through Supreme Court cases. And the lady who led that was from across the river, from St. Louis, Virginia Minor. Virginia Minor in 1872 tried to register to vote in the city of St. Louis. Of course, she was denied, and she took her case to court. No, she didn't take her case to court. Her husband took her case to court. It went all the way to the Supreme Court in Washington, and those wise men said, no, we don't have any right or power to do that. There was a moderate group of women. Julia Ward Howe was there. Julia Ward Howe, the woman who gave us Battle Hymn of the Republic. They were looking at going state by state by state. We were the more radical. Susan, myself, Sojourner Truth, we were radical. We wanted an amendment to the US Constitution. We were the National Women's Suffrage Association. Well, by the 1870s, my children now are in school. They're either grown or they're in school, so I had a little freedom to travel. My husband, Henry, very rarely at home. He was always off, out of town, doing his attorney work or with his political business. Very rarely would he come home. When he did, he was a fine husband and a fine father, but he seemed to want to be away more than he wanted to be at home. So I traveled too, Susan and I. I'd write the speeches, Susan would give them. Oh, every now and then I would talk. We couldn't have been more different. Susan was very tall, very thin, and I looked like somebody's, dumpy grandmother. I was the friendly grandmother. We both had caustic senses of humor. Ooh, Susan could give it. Once, Horace Greeley, the newspaper man, the man who said, "Go west, young man," he questioned Susan Anthony, saying, "Are you prepared to go fight? The ballot must follow the bullet." And Susan looked right at him and said, "Just like you did, Mr. Greeley, in the last war, I will fight with the quill pen." You see, Mr. Greeley didn't fight. He was back home in his newspaper offices. One time in Omaha, Nebraska, this man stood up and said, "Mrs. Stanton, I think the best profession for any woman is to stay at home and have children. My wife has borne me 8 children and they all look like me." And I said, "Sir, I have never met a man worth repeating 8 times. I worked and we traveled and I wrote speeches and wrote speeches. And finally, I said, Susan, I want to stay home for a little bit. But she was relentless. Convention after convention, going on and on. Well, finally, one of my sons was married and living in France, and my daughter, Hattie, was living in London. And I thought, I'm going to get away from this. And I traveled to Europe. I got to see the London suffragettes. Talk about radical women, London suffragettes. And I stayed a while in Paris and a little while in London, and I kept getting letters from whom? Susan. What did she want me to do? Come home. Come home. I need this speech. I need this speech. Well, we sold the house in Seneca Falls, and I moved to Tenafly, New Jersey. And I thought, I am getting older. It should be the next generation. No, I continued to write speeches, and I wrote speeches. I wrote so many speeches that newspapers and magazines continued to publish them months after I was dead. So there were people who thought, I thought she was dead, but she's still writing from the dead. Yes. But in Tenafly, I would write speeches and Susan would give them. I finally, though, could not be president of the National Women's Suffrage Union anymore. I was tired. And I lived with my son Bob in New York. My last son, the over 12-pound baby, was living in New York. And my daughter Maggie, she was a widow now. And they were living in the same apartment in New York, and I joined them. Oh, I would still write. Yes, Susan would come and badger me, but I didn't want to travel anymore. Those later years, my legs didn't want to work, and my eyes were going. I was basically blind. Although I did enjoy newspaper reporters coming up, wanting to interview me, maybe politicians, and they knew my physical condition. And so amazed they were that I could still play the piano, even though I couldn't see. I could still sing, and I could still sit and make my famous orange cake. No recipe, I would be sitting at the kitchen table making the cake for them. One of the last speeches I did give probably was my best. It was called Solitude of Self. I said, ladies, we have to rely on ourselves for salvation. I compared it to a rowboat. Now, madam, if you were in a rowboat with 2 oars, would you wait for someone to save you, or would you? You would row and save yourself. Yes. There was another quote. Just a minute here. Someone questioned me about should women vote, and I said, we are moral, virtuous, and intelligent, and in all respects quite equal. And yet, by law, we are classified with idiots and lunatics. Our legal position is lower than both. The lunatic can vote in his moments of sanity, and the idiot too, if he be a male and not more than 9/10 a fool. But women could not vote. No country has ever had or will ever have peace until every citizen has a voice in the government. Now let us try universal suffrage. We cannot tell its dangers or delights until we make the experiment, right? How can we know if things are going to turn out so horrible? I had a broader vision. Susan was constantly centered in on voting. But by the 1880s, 1890s, I looked outward, and I had other issues. Sensible, comfortable clothing. In the 1850s, I shocked people by wearing bloomers. Ladies, have you tried them? Comfortable, aren't they? Yes. Finally, it was my son who was embarrassed, my oldest son, Neil. And I know I'm in mixed company, but I'm going to tell you, I have not worn a corset in years. Ladies, get rid of them. Sensible clothing. I advocated for clean streets. I advocated for free concerts and free lectures. Free lectures? Yes, indeed. How are people to get an education when they are working night and day? Right, Mother Jones? Yes. Free concerts and free lectures. And add to that, children, free kindergartners. Did you go to a kindergarten? Did you, sir? Yes? Did it help you? Very good. See? Free kindergartners. I advocated for better cooking. This is shocking. I advocated for the right to divorce. And I wanted museums open on Sunday. Mother Jones can tell you those workers work hard, 12, 14 hours a day, Monday through Saturday. Sunday is their only day off. And clergymen want those museums and libraries closed on Sunday. But that's the only day they can go visit. How can they better themselves when the buildings are closed? I also wanted women to have the right to ride a bicycle. Some towns forbid it. Annie Oakley rides a bicycle, why can't we? It's a fine method of transportation. Indeed it is. Well, I knew I was getting older, 86 years old, approaching 87. And I had told my children I did not want a fancy funeral at all. I didn't want any fripperies. And they knew my thoughts on clergy. Carrie Chapman Catt, Margaret Brown, or better as Molly, yes. They fought and they sacrificed. Alice Paul led the women in pickets in front of the White House. They were thrown in jail. Really, no trial. It was a trumped up trial. They were put in prison, horrible conditions. They went on a hunger strike and they were force fed. But finally that amendment was passed. What number amendment? 19th. And what state was the first one to ratify it? Illinois was in 1919. Missouri came along a little later. Finally, Tennessee ratified it on August the 18th, 1920. And that 19th Amendment went into effect. And now, a little over half of the women registered to vote. I find that sad. So, next year, what do you need to do? You need to vote. Now, I am sharing the platform tonight with many, many supporters. Booker T. Washington supported women's rights. William Jennings Bryan, a progressive, advocated for that. Mr. Twain did not want women voting first, but he changed his mind and he said, I know that since the women started out on their crusade, they have scored in every project they undertook against unjust laws. I would like to see them help make the laws and those who are to enforce them. I would like to see the whiplash in women's hands. Yes? Mother Jones is constantly worried about workers' rights. She said, you don't need the vote to raise a little hell. So I thank you so much for letting me come tonight and tell you a little about myself. Well, perhaps is there a question or two that you might have? A question? Afraid to ask a dead woman a question? No? Well, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening and the rest of these august speakers. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. One more round of applause for her. So one of the great things about a Chautauqua is it's not only educational, it's also entertainment for you, because the human soul needs to be lifted up by music and by art and literature. And we have not only the St. Louis Brass Band, who you heard earlier today, but we have a special a cappella group from Edwardsville right here in town who is going to lift your spirits. And one of the things I love best about a cappella is it really celebrates the beauty of the human voice. So I think, are we ready to go? Okay. And a couple of announcements that she'd like to make. So I will pass the talking stick over to her now.
Thanks, Mom. Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Atwine. I have the privilege of working with these young adults every day. So you're going to hear three groups today. The first is Bel Canto. This is an auditioned group that meets every Tuesday after school. And this group has a special distinction this year, as they are going to be performing at the Illinois Music Educators All-State Convention up in Peoria in January, which is quite an honor. So we're very excited about that. So here are two songs that we will be singing in that concert as well as today. The first one is called The Little Road, and it's about being beckoned by the road and being beckoned by home at the same time, and the conflict that arises therein. And the second one is a poem that is found on actually the gravestone of Mark Twain's daughter, Susie, who died very young. And when she died, Mark Twain was heartbroken by her death, and this is the poem that is on her tombstone. It's called Good Night, Sweetheart. So The Little Road followed by Good Night, Sweetheart.
my deeds, and go I must, my deeds, and journey while I'm there. Oh, my heart beats sore for the little house that had no word but stay, word but stay. Oh, my heart beats sore for the little house that had no word but stay. Maybe no other way your child would ever know. My little house would have you stay when the little road says go. Maybe no other way your child would ever know. My little house would have you stay when the little road says go. Summer sun, shine kindly. Warm southern wind blows softly. Green sun above, thy Good night, dear heart. Good night. Good night. Summer sun, shine kindly, Warm southern wind blows softly. Green sun above, Good night, dear heart. Good
This next group is the Acapellas. So they are 14 young men that auditioned this year to be in this group. And they will be singing for you Stand By Me and Alexander's, what is it? Thank you, Alexander's Ragtime Band. It's one of my favorites. I couldn't think of it.
boom, 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 boom,
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you'll stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. The sky that we look upon should tumble and fall, or the mountain should crumble in the sea. No, I won't cry. Shed a tear, just as long as you stand by me. So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. So darling, 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 stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. Stand by me. Come on in here, come on in here. Right here, it's the best band in the land. They can play a bugle call like you never heard before. Ta-ta-ta, natural, ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta. That's just the bestest band would have. My honey lamb, come on along, come along, come on along, come along. Let me take you by the hand to the man, to the man, to the man, to the man who's the leader of the band. And if you care to hear that Swanee River played in ragtime, come on in here, come on in here, come on in here, come on in here. Alexander's ragtime band. Hear that music, ain't it grand? It's the best band in the land. Ragtime band.
This next group is called the Chamber Singers. This is actually a curricular group, so they meet every day during the school day as part of their curriculum. And they auditioned for this group back in May. And so there's 17 total of them, and they are traveling to Millikan University tomorrow to perform at Millikan with the Millikan University Choirs, and we are leading a workshop there for the Millikan Vocal Festival. So we've been working really hard to prepare for that. So we are going to sing 3 of those songs plus one other. We're going to start with a song called Resonet in Laudibus, which means let the praises resound. And yes, it's a Christmas song, because this group puts on an annual madrigal in December, and that is full of, it takes us back to merry old England, and they sing a lot of madrigal songs, but it's also the Christmas season, so we sing a lot of Christmas season. So we're already preparing for that. So this is Resonet in Laudibus, let the praises resound.
Christus natus hodie ex Maria Virgine sine virilis semine apparuit quem genuit Maria sleeps the infant Savior. Today is born Emmanuel, Emmanuel in Israel. Mary's babe, the Savior, Lord Emmanuel. roofs, away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, they fly. Birds fly over the rainbow. They know I can't if happy little bluebirds fly above the rainbow, why, oh, I can't, why can't I?
This is, I'm so sorry, pardon me. This is Bridge Over Troubled Water. Our soloist is Amanda Guzwell.
shine, 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 shine. Oh, if you need a friend, I'm sailing right behind, like a bridge over troubled water. I will ease your mind, like a bridge over troubled water. I will ease your mind, your mind. Bridge over troubled water. I will ease your mind.
The last piece is You Stole My Love, Fie Upon You, Fie.
You stole my love, fire upon you, fire. You stole my love, fire, fire. Guessed you but what a pain it is to prove you for your love would die, and henceforth never longer be such a crafty wronger. But when he takes such a form, there was the lonely voice and all. You stole my love, fire, 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 fire. Fire upon you, fire upon you, fire, fire, fire upon you, fire upon you, fire upon you, fire, fire, fire. You stole my love, you stole my love, fire, fire upon you, fire. You stole my love, fire, fire upon you. You stole my love, fire upon you, fire. You stole my love, fire on you, fire on you, my love, my love. You stole my fire on you.
Friends, a round of applause one more time for the Edwardsville a cappella group. They were wonderful. I have an announcement here from the committee, and it's an important one. I wish to remind you that games of baseball will be permitted after our last program of the day. Until then, please refrain from ball throwing near the speaker's platform. I don't move as quickly as I used to, and it's hard for me to get out of the way of baseballs thrown in my general direction. So friends, if you please, if you must throw the baseball, feel free to throw them at the back, on the lawn, towards the fountain, or if you please, wait until after our last program today. I have a special guest up here for everyone. Before we get to our next speaker, Catherine has come all the way from Ukraine. This is her first Chautauqua, and she's come, as she said, from the other side of the world to take part in our Chautauqua here in Edwardsville today, our first in 140 years. So could everyone please welcome Catherine all the way from Ukraine for her first Chautauqua. And Catherine, we're all curious, first of all, welcome, and we're all very curious, what have you enjoyed most about our Chautauqua today?
I really like the games, especially the Jacob's Ladder.
Oh, Jacob's Ladder. Of course, we talked about Jacob's Ladder. Mary was talking about it earlier today. What do you like about the game Jacob's Ladder, Catherine?
It's just really fun to fold.
Oh, good. And maybe you'd be willing to demonstrate it for us after our next speaker, Catherine? Might you be willing to? Good, very good. So I'm very excited about our next speaker. I want to make sure I get all the information right, but I nearly have it committed to memory, as popular as he is in our great state of Illinois. William Jennings Bryan, who you're all familiar with, was born in Salem, Illinois, a wonderful little town south of there. I've been there a number of times myself. He went to Illinois College in Jacksonville, where I believe there is still a stone with his initials engraved on it. If you get to Jacksonville to see an Illinois College, William Jennings Bryan's initials are still carved in stone there. He practiced law in Jacksonville before moving to Lincoln, Nebraska in 1887, the great state of Nebraska. Mr. Bryan was elected to Congress in 1890 as a candidate for the Populist Party. A strong supporter of farmers and working men, Mr. Bryan quickly became known as the Boy Orator of the Platte. One poet wrote of Mr. Bryan's fame that he was like a mountain lion who rose from the plains to scourge the land of plutocrats. And if I could just quote from that poem, just one stanza: Prairie Avenger, Mountain Lion, Bryan, 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 gigantic troubadour speaking like a siege gun, smashing Plymouth Rock with his boulders from the west. Let's hear it for the boulders from the west, ladies and gentlemen. We can show those Easterners what we do out here in the Midwest for the working people of this country. He stands for the people and was nominated in 1896 by the Democratic Party to run for President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you the great commoner, William Jennings Bryan.
Let us hope that these contraptions and I become fast friends. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for that warm welcome. I'm glad to be back in Illinois, where, as you may recall, I was born not far from here in Salem. My parents were honest, hard-working farmers, and I was raised according to the strict tenets of the Protestant faith. I mention these facts because, like you, I worked the land with my hands. Honest sweat and reverence to the Almighty have made me who I am today. Yes, when I went to Illinois College and began to practice law in Jacksonville, that fine town just north of here, I never forgot my roots as a farmer, a working man, and a man of faith. I've always stood for the people of this great nation. You might recall that as a congressman from Nebraska, I fought against the robber barons and unholy monopolies that oppress honest, hardworking people. I was elected to Congress as a member of the Populist Party. It was my honor to be nominated by the Democratic Party in 1896 to run for President of the United States. Although I lost to Mr. McKinley and his band of plutocrats, I have not given up the fight to ensure that the people will rule as God intended. Mr. McKinley and the Republican Party have imposed the gold standard for our money and our tariffs on the everyday goods we need to buy, all of which hurt the common man in America. The tariffs make us pay higher prices for the goods we need, and the gold standard puts us deeper in debt and harder to pay our loans. The gold standard and high tariffs keep the plutocrats rich, and the honest and working men and farmers of this country poor. Our government needs to protect individuals and the democratic process from monopolies and corporations. Shall the people rule is my watchword. My Republican critics call me a dangerous demagogue, but I am a champion of the people. I believe in direct election of senators, income tax for the rich, free silver, and end to monopolies, women's suffrage, and prohibition. As I said in my speech at the Democratic Party convention in Chicago 2 years ago, this is not a contest among persons. The humblest citizen in all the land, when clad in the armor of a righteous cause, is stronger than all the whole hosts of error they could bring. I come to speak to you in defense of a cause as holy as the cause of liberty, the cause of humanity. When this debate is concluded, a motion will be made to lay upon the table the resolution in commendation of the administration, and also the resolution in condemnation of the administration. I shall object to bringing this down to the level of persons. The individual is but an atom. He is born, he acts, he dies. But principles are eternal. And this has been a contest of principles. Never before in the history of this country has there been witnessed such a contest as that through which we have passed. Never before in the history of American politics has a great issue been fought out on this issue as has been by the voters themselves. On the 4th of March, 1895, a few Democrats, most of them members of Congress, issued an address to the Democrats of the nation asserting that the money question was the paramount question of the hour, asserting also the right of the majority of the Democratic Party to control the position of the party on this paramount issue, concluding with requests that all believers in free coinage of silver in the Democratic Party should organize and take charge of and control the policy of the Democratic Party. 3 months later at Memphis, an organization was perfected, and the Silver Democrats went forth openly and boldly and courageously proclaiming their belief with the declaration of a platform which they had made. And then began the conflict with a zeal approaching that which inspired the Crusaders who followed Peter the Hermit. Our civil Democrats went forth from victory unto victory until they are assembled now, not to discuss, not to debate, but to enter up the judgment rendered by the plain people of this country. But in this contest, brother has been arrayed against brother, and father against son. The warmest ties of love and acquaintance and association have been disregarded. Old leaders have been cast aside when they refused to give expression to the sentiments of those whom they would lead. And new leaders have sprung up to give direction to this cause of freedom. Thus has the contest been waged, and we have assembled here under as binding and solemn instructions as were ever fastened upon the representatives of a people. We stand here representing people who are the equals before the law of the largest cities of Massachusetts. When you come before us and tell us that we shall disturb your business interests, we reply that you have disturbed our business interests. We say to you, you have made too limited in its application the definition of a businessman. The man who is employed for wages is just as much a businessman as is his employer. The attorney in a country town is as much a businessman as the corporation counsel in a great metropolis. The merchant at the crossroads store is as much a businessman as the merchant in New York. The farmer who goes forth in the morning and toils all day, begins in the spring and toils all summer, and by the application of brain and muscle to the natural resources of this country creates wealth, is as much a businessman as the man who goes upon the board of trade and bets upon the price of grain. The miners who go 1,000 feet into the earth or climb 2,000 feet upon the cliffs and bring forth from their hiding places the precious metals to be poured in the channels of trade are as much businessmen as the few financial magnates who, in a back room, corner the money of the world. We come to speak for this broader class of businessmen. Oh, my friends, we say not one word against those people on the Atlantic coast, but those hardy pioneers who braved all the dangers of the wilderness, who have made the desert to bloom as the rose, those pioneers away out there rearing their children near to nature's heart, where their voices can mingle with those of the birds, where they have erected schoolhouses for the education of their children, and churches as they praise their Creator, and the cemeteries where sleep the ashes of their dead, are as deserving of the consideration of this party as any people in this country. It is for these that we speak. We do not come as aggressors. Our war is not a war of conquest. We are fighting in the defense of our homes, our families, and our posterity. We have petitioned, and our petitions have been scorned. We have entreated, and our entreaties have been disregarded. We have begged, and they have mocked us when our calamity came. We beg no longer. We entreat no longer. We petition no more. We defy them. My friend, in this land of the free, you need fear no tyrant who will spring up from among the people. What we need is an Andrew Jackson to stand as Jackson stood against the encroachments of aggregated wealth. The income tax is a just law. It simply intends to put the burdens of government justly upon the backs of the people. I am in favor of an income tax. When I find a man who is not willing to pay his share of the burden of the government which protects him, I find a man who is unworthy to enjoy the blessings of a government like ours. He says we are opposing the national currency. Oh, it is true. If you what Thomas Benton said, you will find he said that in searching history he could find but one parallel to Andrew Jackson. That was Cicero, who destroyed the conspiracies of Catiline and saved Rome. He did for Rome what Jackson did when he destroyed the bank conspiracy and saved America. We say in our platform that we believe the right to coin money and issue money is a function of government. We believe it. We believe it is a part of sovereignty and can no more with safety be delegated to private individuals than can the power to make penal statutes or levy laws for taxation. I stand with Jefferson rather than with them and tell them, as he did, that the issue of money is a function of the government and that the banks should go out of the governing business. Thank you. They complain about the plank which declares against the life tenure in office. They've tried to strain it to mean that which it does not mean. What we oppose in that plank is the life tenure that is being built up in Washington, which establishes an office holding class and excludes from participation in the benefits the humbler members of our society. Let me call attention to 2 or 3 great things. The gentleman from New York says he will propose an amendment providing that the change in our law shall not affect contracts which, according to the present laws, are made payable in gold. But if he means to say that we cannot change our monetary system without protecting those who have loaned money before the change was made, I want to ask him where, in law or morals, he can find authority for not protecting the debtors when the Act of 1873 was passed, when now he insists we must protect the creditor. He says that he also wants to amend this platform so as to provide that if we fail to mention or attain parity within a year, that we will then suspend the coinage of silver. Now, we reply that when we advocate a thing which we believe will be successful, we are not compelled to raise a doubt as to our own sincerity by trying to show what we will do if we're wrong. Now, my friends, let me come to the great paramount issue. If they ask us here why it is we say more on the money question than we say upon the tariff question, I reply that if protection has slain its thousands, the gold standard has slain its tens of thousands. If they ask us why we did not embody all these things in our platform, which we believe, we reply to them that when we have restored the money of the Constitution, all other necessary reforms will be possible. And until that is done, there is no reform that can be accomplished. We go forth confident that we will win. Why? Because upon the paramount issue in this campaign, there is not a spot of ground upon which the enemy will dare to challenge battle. Why? If they tell us the gold standard is a good thing, we point to their platform and tell them that their platform pledges the party to get rid of a gold standard and substitute bimetallism. If the gold standard is a good thing, why try to get rid of it? If the gold standard, and I might call your attention to the fact that some of the very people who are in this convention today and who tell you that we ought to declare in favor of international bimetallism and thereby declare that the gold standard is wrong and that the principles of bimetallism are better, these very same people 4 months ago were open and avowed advocates of the gold standard and telling us that we could not legislate two metals together, even with all the world. I want to suggest this truth, that if the gold standard is a good thing, we ought to declare in favor of its retention and not in favor of abandoning it. And if the gold standard is a bad thing, why should we wait until other nations are willing to help us let it go? Mr. Carlyle said in 1878 that this was a struggle between the idle holders of idle capital and the struggling masses who produce the wealth and pay the taxes of this country. And my friends, it is simply a question that we shall decide upon. Which side shall the Democratic Party fight? Upon the side of the idle holders of idle capital, or upon the side of the struggling masses? That is the question that the party must answer first, and then it must be answered by each individual thereafter. The sympathies of the Democratic Party, as described by the platform, are on the side of the struggling masses who have ever been the foundation of the Democratic Party. There are but two ideas of government. There are those who believe that if you legislate to make the well-to-do prosperous, that their prosperity will leak on down to those below. The Democratic idea has been that if you legislate to make the masses prosperous, their prosperity will find its way up and through every class that rests upon it. You come to us and tell us that the great cities are in favor of the gold standard. I tell you that the great cities rest upon the broad and fertile prairies. Burn down your cities and leave our farms, and your cities will spring up again as if by magic. But destroy our farms, and the grass will grow in the streets of every city in the country. My friends, we shall declare that this nation is able to legislate for its own people on every question without waiting for the aid or consent of any other nation on earth. And upon that issue, we expect to carry every single state in the Union. It's the issue of 1776 all over again. Our ancestors, when but 3 million, had the courage to declare their political independence of every other nation upon earth. Shall we, their descendants, when we have grown to 70 million, declare that we are less independent than our forefathers? No, my friends. It will not be the judgment of this people. Therefore, we care not upon which lines the battle is fought. If they say bimetallism is good, but we cannot have it till some nation helps us, we reply that instead of having the gold standard, because England has, we shall restore bimetallism and then let England have bimetallism because the United States have. If they dare to come out in the open field and defend the gold standard as a good thing, we shall fight them to the uttermost, having behind us the producing masses of the nation and the world. Having behind us the commercial interests and the laboring interests and all the toiling masses, we shall answer their demands for a gold standard by saying to them You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Thank you. 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 Thank you.
William Jennings Bryan, everyone. If we could give him another round of applause from his speech at the Democratic National Convention in 1896. I have another announcement from the Chautauqua Committee, and it's an important one. Please remember that you may enjoy playing card games, but no games of chance are permitted. This is a family Chautauqua, ladies and gentlemen, where we build character for the edification of all Americans. Please feel free to play cards, just not games of chance. Before we move on to our next speaker, we're going to let our next musical performance set up behind me. But before we move on, while they set up, I just wanted to introduce again my wife, May Fry. She is here with the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And you can see here she's advocating for the right for women to vote, an important issue for all of us here. Of course, Elizabeth Cady Stanton has already spoken to it, and we appreciate her work. And we appreciate especially that she joined us here today. I'd just like to ask May, how are you enjoying our Chautauqua, wife?
It's been a delightful afternoon. I've learned so much from these eloquent speakers.
Thank you very much. And I just want to ask for some holdouts out there, and it's okay. We live in a republic where we celebrate free speech and freedom of thought. But for some of our holdouts, May, if you could make the case how women's suffrage will help our country.
Well, clearly, as we have seen this afternoon, the women in the audience have brought their husbands, their fathers, their children to get some culture and education. And yet, they are not allowed the right to vote. The men have been immorally leading this country for far too long and have clearly not risen to the challenge of a just and prosperous nation. And it's time to turn our hands over to the women who clearly are the moral guidance in the household. Think about how many women today are holding the hands of their children while their husbands are holding a drink in their hands.
What's wrong with that?
The drink corrupts, the women do not. So friends, please keep that in mind as we consider moving our country morally forward and allow women the right to vote. Thank you.
Here, here.
Votes for women!
And I don't want to claim to be speaking for the Women's Christian Temperance Union here, but I believe that most of us here in the Chautauqua Circuit are in favor of temperance over prohibition. As you know, that temperance advocates the personal decision to cease the demon drink rather than passing a law or constitutional amendment that would make alcohol illegal in the United States. We, of course, believe that the personal turning away from demon rum is ultimately the best way to keep a person from it.
Votes for women!
Votes for women. Thank you very much. Mary wanted to show you Jacob's Ladder, and as you know, if there are any children left in the audience, we have a number of games at the back. We know that it's a long day for you, and we appreciate that you've been able to sit here with your parents and hear our speakers and our music today. But there's also room to play in the back. You can see there's some children back there playing Graces and running around on the lawn. And Mary wanted to introduce the game that she mentioned earlier called Jacob's Ladder. So Mary, would you like to say anything about it before you show us Jacob's Ladder?
I do say that this is not really a game, but it's more of an entertainment of a toy that you can sit with and just watch.
Okay, so sort of a toy you can sit with and watch. All right, so go ahead and show everyone Jacob's Ladder. That's it, ladies and gentlemen, Jacob's Ladder. Now, our next speaker will be coming out soon. Now, let me query with Steve. Are we all right? So I will introduce our next speaker, and I'm very excited to have him here today, and I know you're going to enjoy his talk very much. Booker T. Washington was born a slave in 1854 in Virginia. After emancipation, his family moved to West Virginia, where Mr. Washington worked at age 9 in a salt furnace and then a coal mine. In 1872, he enrolled in Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute. He worked as a janitor there to pay for his tuition. And he graduated in 1875 and returned home to teach young children and adults, truly an example of the Chautauqua way. While teaching, Mr. Washington attended seminary school in Washington, D.C. in 1881, and he was selected to head a newly established normal school for African American children in Tuskegee, Alabama. He has transformed the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute into a large college of over 100 buildings, 200 faculty, and 1,500 students. It is my pleasure to introduce an inspiration to us all and an educator, Booker T. Washington, who will speak to us about education and democracy. Mr. Washington.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I wish to preface my remarks today on democracy and education with a few comments about the Negro race in America. I was born a slave on a plantation in Franklin County, Virginia. I am not quite sure of the exact date or the exact location. My life had its beginnings in the midst of the most miserable and discouraging surroundings. This was not so because my owners were especially cruel, but because of how we were forced to live. Of my ancestry, I know almost nothing. My mother and I were purchased by our owner, and it attracted about as much attention as a new horse or cow. Of my father, I know even less. I do not know his name, but I was told that he was a white man who lived on a nearby plantation. Our living space was also the kitchen of our plantation, and my mother was the cook. There were no windows, but only openings to let light in and cold air in the winter and hot air in the summer. We slept on the dirt floor on a pile of rags. I never slept in a bed until after emancipation. Our lives were like many other slaves. My mother had little time for her children, and we were put to work almost immediately. There was never anything like free time or playtime. We never had regular meals either. We ate what we could when we could, like most farm animals. We were very much aware of the war, and I remember my mother praying for Mr. Lincoln and the Yankees. I didn't understand what it all meant because all I ever knew was slavery. I remember that through the grapevine, we knew that freedom was close. The day finally arrived when we were called to the plantation house. Our owners were on the porch. A United States officer stood and read to us the Emancipation Proclamation, I think. At any rate, my mother cried and told us that we were free. After a short while, we began to worry about what we would do next. Where would we go? Where would we work? How and where would we live? This brings me to my topic of democracy and education. We live in a troubled time. The promise of Reconstruction has been replaced by Jim Crow, segregation, discrimination, and lynching. I do not accept discrimination and unequal treatment, but I am a pragmatist. I believe the path to equality is through education and economic self-sufficiency, not political agitation.
And you can't even afford to bury them when they die. You have to borrow the money to buy them a casket. Do you know why? Do you know why? Because some human being broke that great commandment, thou shalt not steal. They built their gilded palaces on the bleeding, quivering hearts and souls of you and your children. They know hard work. Do you know what a gilded palace is? It's a thin layer of shiny material covering concrete and brick and mortar and steel and a stone foundation. Laborers know hard work, and they don't cover it with shiny material. We want liberty, but do you even know what liberty is today? Do you know? The definition of liberty is freedom, freedom from arbitrary control. Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." But he also said, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. We have to keep fighting to keep from losing ground. There's two classes of people out there. Two. Those that create the wealth and those that steal it. So which side are you on? Which side? For those of you who don't know me, the newcomers that are out here, I'm Mary Harris Jones. I come from Cork, Ireland. During the potato famine I was born. They say that the Lord sent the pestilence, but the wealthy sent the famine, and I believe it. In Ireland, you'd see a little stand of clothes, rags, and pretty soon they'd be walking down the street and they'd drop to the ground. Little piles of rags all over in Cork. And at night, there'd be a wagon that would come up and down the roads, and they'd pick up these little bundles of rags, and in them were a little bundle of bones where people were starving. So my father got passage on board a ship and came to America. And he got a job working on a railroad. And he saved every penny and sent for Mother and me. And we spent 5 weeks on board a ship coming across the ocean to this great country looking for liberty. And my parents didn't want me to suffer, just like other immigrant parents don't want their children to suffer either. And so they sent me to school. And I got a teaching certificate. Do you know what that was? It was a letter of character recommendation from the parish priest. Catholic, Irish, female, what did he know? I took up teaching, but I didn't like bossing little children around, and I only got paid $8 a month. $8, that was half of what a man would have gotten paid. So I worked 4 months, and I left. I quit my job.
and I went to Memphis. Because in Memphis there was going to be these rumors of skirmishes breaking out, you know, between the Union Confederates, and they were arguing back and forth. But they were making good money because there were 4 railroads in Memphis at the time. So I went to Memphis looking for work, and what I found was Mr. Jones. Mr. George Jones. And I married him. He was an iron molder. He was a laborer, and he belonged to the Union. And we had 4 children. Because we were Irish, we lived in the very poorest part of town. Even a poorer part of town than what the former slaves lived in, because we were frowned upon. We were Irish. We lived in a little town down outside Memphis called Pinch, because we were so skinny, there was nothing for you to pinch. And after the war, we heard rumors that there was going to be yellow fever coming up from New Orleans, and they blamed it on the immigrants because the immigrants had no immune to the yellow fever, so they seemed to die first. And they quarantined my house. My whole neighborhood was quarantined. My children, do you know what yellow fever is? It starts out like the flu. You think you got the flu, and you get a really bad headache. My husband and my babies all had this horrible headache, and their fever got so high, they got delirious, and it was a godsend they got delirious, because after that, they started bleeding to death. And there was no way to clean them up. You couldn't take and bury them. So I wrapped them in my little blankets, and just like in Ireland, you laid your little baby out on the doorstep, and the wagon would come down at night, creaking down the road, and you'd hear them pick up your children or your husband and put them in the wagon and take them away to a mass grave far outside the city. I stayed there until the fever was over, alone and penniless in my house. And afterwards, the iron molders, they had a wonderful memorial service, and they saw that I got the money from my husband's last check. And I packed up my little bit of memories, and I went to Chicago. Oh, and I took up dressmaking. And I saw that the wealthy there who could afford the dressmaking had no regard for the poor people. None at all. They would look out of their tropical palaces and gaze down at the lakefront, and they would see people freezing or suffering in the summer in the heat and have no regard for them. They didn't care for the people that worked for them. They were concerned with their fancy dresses and their shoes and their parties. In fact, in Chicago, they built wooden sidewalks all over the city so that the ladies wouldn't have to step into the muck and the mire and soil their garments. Well, it was because of these very sidewalks that when the flames started in October and were fanned by the winds on that Friday, the wind picked up and the flames picked up, and the firefighters couldn't keep up with it. They blamed it on that Mrs. O'Leary's cow. Well, that was a lie. They just wanted to blame it on the Irish. And the flames kept racing down the wooden sidewalk and lapping up the side of the building, and we thought for sure the firefighters could put it out. And so we backed up against the lake. And as the evening fell, the flames went higher, and the ashes and the smoke billowed toward us, and we backed into the lake. We didn't know if the flames and the smoke was going to suffocate us and take us to our death, or if it was going to be the murky back lake behind us pulling our garments in that would drown us. The next morning, all that we could see off into the distance was 3 walls of St. Mary's Church left standing. So we made our way through the smoke and the debris. The smell was awful. And we gathered there at St. Mary's Church, what was left of it. And there was no work. So I began selling subscriptions to a little magazine called Appeal to Reason that the union laborers had. The Knights of Labor would meet there, and they were helping us. So I would sell the subscriptions as I went to collect food and monies for people who were starving, who were out of work. And so I would see these people with these terrible stories, and they would tell them to me. And so I started writing them down because I knew how to read and write. I wrote the stories down, I submitted them to Appeal to Reason, and they published what I wrote. And people demanded to know more. I was not a humanitarian. I was a hellraiser. I began to investigate these abuses to see for myself if they were really true. So I got myself a job in a mill. And I went down there and I said, since they would only hire if you had a whole family, I said, oh, my children are up in Chicago and I'm bringing them with me as soon as I make enough money. Well, I never let a little bit of the truth interfere with a good story. So I told them, that they would be coming down if they give me a job. And so, the mill owner, he said, why, certainly, he says, and I've even got a house I can rent to you. I said, a house for me and my children, how wonderful. And he took me to see this house. And let me tell you, the floorboards were falling through. The windows were broken out. The roof was leaking. The United Mine Workers heard about my organizing and my soliciting, and they suggested that they hire me. And the